Again, it's a pleasure to be here. Really face to face, huh? I mean, I'm an academic, so essentially we've missed that face-to-face discussion. So definitely a pleasure to be here to talk to you again about our passion. Before we get into our topic of utilizing AI and ML to understand your company's risk maturity appetite and readiness for supply chain risk journey, I'll give you a real quick thumbnail sketch of Greg. I am the founder of an organization called the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. It's essentially 30 companies, about 1,500 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. We operate in 23 countries. We've been in business about 12 years. This is all we do, supply chain risk management. The organizations, I believe I have a slide to give you a sense of who we are and what we are. We'll talk about that in a minute. But these companies bring tools, techniques, and methodologies to help us, the consortium, identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks. So very exciting to be here. I teach supply chain risk management at Lehigh University. I've been teaching in our MBA curriculum for about 10 years. That's really where the genesis of the consortium started. I also teach something called ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. We're not going to talk about that today. We might talk about it on Wednesday in our deep dive workshop, but I teach ERM at Villanova University in the States as well. Essentially, I'm an old IBMer. I worked for IBM for about 8 years as a supply chain executive consultant across multiple industries, so I'm very comfortable talking about almost every industry out there. I'm a practitioner, a 30-year practitioner, maybe like many of you. I worked for about 3 or 4 Fortune 100 manufacturers in the supply chain arena, and I'm kind of a lifelong member, I think I am, a lifelong member of APEX, which is now ASCM, and that whole experience over my entire career ended up culminating in being the president of ASCM back in the late 90s. So pretty much a career in supply chain management. For the last 12 years, we've been focusing on supply chain risk management. So I will be your host for the next 40 minutes, kind of a TED Talk. I will entertain any questions. If we can't really give you a crisp answer, I'm here until the end of Wednesday. We can always talk about that concept that you want to chat about over coffee, but I do want to make sure that I share with you the content of the presentation. So with that, let's take a look. Our agenda looks like this. I give you a glimpse into real basic AI, ML, and NLP as we see it, our point of view. Then we'll talk about supply chain risk maturity, risk appetite, and what we call operational propensities of a company, really culture. We'll talk a little bit about why risk appetite is so important to understand. Then we'll get into a company use cases from the 90-day assessment. That's a tool that we're going to talk about that we put online using AI and ML algorithms. So we'll give you some context associated with the tool and the outcomes. We'll give you some benefits of indoctrinating supply chain risk and resiliency programs, some quick hit benefits. And then we'll give you a little bit of how do you know if you're ready for a supply chain risk and resiliency journey. That's how we'll end it up. And if we have time, I'll entertain any other questions. If not, again, we can talk about clarity of a question over a coffee. So with that, that's kind of our agenda. Here we go. I said we'd give you a sense of who we are and what we provide. You can see on the left, we have 3 pillars, kind of an education pillar, consulting pillar, and software as a solution. One very, a prediction in our book, and our book was produced in 2015, so it's getting long in the tooth, it's 7 years old, but we made several bold predictions, myself and our director of curriculum, supply chain curriculum at Lehigh. We made about 15 bold predictions back in 2014 when we were finishing the book. One was there will be more and more software solutions in the cloud to do a lot of heavy lifting in this space. And it's really encouraging to evangelists like us to see there's more than this. These are just the folks who are in our consortium that work with us every day, but there are even more software solutions coming online every day to help us help ourselves do the heavy lifting in this space. Then we have consulting, we have education. That's kind of who we are. What we provide over there, online education. We have 2 online courses that are very well attended. One's a basic course. Another one we felt compelled to take our body of knowledge and apply it to public healthcare supply chains. That is very well represented with attendees. So we have 2, and they culminate in a certificate of achievement from the organization. We do virtual training. We've been doing about 4 webinars a month since April of 2020. Classroom training, I'm hoping to get back into the classroom this year, face-to-face. We produce certificates and certifications. We also support other organizations, .org education organizations with certificates as well. We do awareness, mitigation. We bring supply chain risk and resiliency best practices from our book. We coach companies on their journey. We help build supply chain risk war rooms. I'm not sure if I have, I may have a supply chain risk war room slide in this presentation. We're very excited about the bottom 2 bullets. We've gone online entirely as an organization because we had to. Many of us have had to adapt. We have 2 assessments, 2 online assessment tools. One is supply chain management readiness, and the other one we're going to talk about today in bold is our prescriptive online 90-day action plan. So we've been busy. It is a busy environment. We're stretched at times, but we're trying to help folks help themselves in this VUCA world, and we'll talk about that. All right. I thought I'd start this with a definition. What is enterprise resiliency and supply chain risk management? Just to get you grounded. This comes from our book. This is the best definition we've seen in a long while. We put it in the book. What is a resilient enterprise? It has the capacity to overcome disruptions and continually transform itself to meet changing needs and expectations of customers, shareholders, and other stakeholders. I'll be honest with you, that's a very tall order. All right, it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's any type of supply chain risk, any. That's bold. But this to us is the why. Why would anyone spend any time learning about these best practices and then putting them in place in their organization? That's the why. From the book, the supply chain risk management definition is really the what and the how to do it. All right, so our definition of SCR-M looks like this. It's the implementation of strategies to manage everyday and exceptional risks throughout your entire supply chain through continuous risk assessment with the objective of doing what? Reducing your business vulnerability and ensuring business continuity. Think of it this way, excuse me. Think of it as the intersection between good supply chain management, performance management, which we all know and love, and pure risk management. So we think it's the new math. 1 + 1 = 3. That's the way we think about supply chain risk and resiliency. I wanted to get you grounded on that. Now some latest street buzz about the space. This comes from Supply Chain Brain, a friend of the consortium. Magazine, well-known, well-respected in the US. They've gone virtual as well. They partnered up with AlixPartners and Bloomberg, came up with a global survey at the end of 2021, and it said this: the C-suite's top concerns include supply chains, labor, and cybersecurity. The number one, the majority of CEOs are concerned about broken supply chains, and rightfully so. They should. They're also having trouble hiring workers and managing poorly developed IT networks. This was really the finding. This one caught our eye. The C-suite is a bundle of nerves this winter. And this was at the end of 2021. New survey shows that 72% of chief executive officers are worried about losing their jobs in 2022 because of business interruptions. So it has transcended itself. Our business, our profession, is now up in the C-suite, and you know that. We're on TV, we're on the news, we're on the internet. Everybody seems to have an idea now of what supply chain, they can spell it, what supply chain management is. So it's great, but now we're in the spotlight, all right? And the spotlight has gone up through the C-suite as well. I think I have a couple more later. So I just wanted to get you grounded on a couple of definitions and then spend just a real quick couple minutes on how we see the basic AI, ML, and NLP as it relates to this tool. I'll start with this. It's a busy slide, comes from Gartner. Everybody kind of knows Gartner. This is the hype curve about AI. I think this was back in 2019. I'm not going to go through and give you all the approaches, but just the y-axis on the left is expectations from low to high, and the x-axis is what they call segments within the hype cycle. So it goes from innovation, peak inflated expectations, trough of disillusion, we like that one, slope of enlightenment, and plateau of productivity. This was back in the July of 2019, but there are things that are coming our way. AI and ML, as Johan mentioned in the opening, it's here, and it's here to stay. It's just a function of how quickly we will be able to leverage some of the AI and ML. There's custom developed AI solutions out there. They're in the cloud. They're in search engines. They're starting to be embedded in our ERP, CRM, SCM tools and techniques. Some folks are automating using machine language as well. So I think it's here to stay. We've actually, the reason we're giving you some helpful hints on this is we've taken our 12 years of experience in this space and kind of moved it into an online survey using some AI and ML algorithms. So we just wanted to give you a sense of some definitions. Let's see what we got here. Our definitions as we place them in our book. AI, take a look. You may or may not agree, but machines are devices that have software that learns from experience, can identify patterns, can adjust to new inputs, and perform some human-like tasks. AI is huge, and then there are several subsets within AI, like machine learning. Subset of artificial intelligence describes the algorithms and statistical models that computer systems use to perform a specific task without explicit instructions, relying on patterns and inference. You know, very general definition of ML. And then there's something else whether you're familiar with it or not, natural language programming. This is new. This is kind of the IBM Watson, the supercomputers, but it's already prevalent in several different types of industries, broadly defined as the automatic manipulation of natural language, like speech and text, by software. And many of us, I think, are already call centers and so forth. So NLP, we used some artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to help us build out what we're going to profile for you today. So I just wanted to, again, get you grounded. Here's something else from McKinsey. They're doing a lot of good work on artificial intelligence and supply chain risk and resiliency. I think I have a couple of McKinsey slides in here as well. Again, it's pretty busy, but essentially they did a study a couple years ago about looking at what companies were doing and the rate of adoption. So essentially what you see on the left are what folks said they were doing, and then the color codes are associated with dark blue is we've embedded some of these into our business processes multiple times. The lighter blue is we're doing at least one function in a business unit, and then the gray is more or less we're piloting. We have a pilot associated with those techniques. And then you can actually see they even further qualified it on the left with the most digitized companies, because they asked a host of questions, versus all other. So you can take a look at it. There's machine language, there's natural language, text, robotics, and so forth, computer vision. Just wanted to share with you a profile of what was going on back about, I think, 2 years ago, as it relates to adoption. So it's here to stay. It's just a function of how rapidly it will be embedded into our supply chain lives. All right. So let's talk about risk maturity, risk appetite, and operating propensities, what we call culture, as it relates to supply chain risk and resiliency. All right. What was the impetus for us to develop this tool in an online arena? I wanted to share that with you and get you grounded there. First of all, it was the COVID-19 pandemic, which started back in March of 2020. That seems like such a long time ago. The McKinsey report, which I will show you in a minute. If you can get your hands on this report, these guys are great. They have a lot of resources. They can do deep dives. I'll show you a couple of charts in a minute. But this one really caught our eye in November of 2020. It's called Why Investing in Supply Chain Resiliency Pays Off. Really did a nice job. That helped us decide. The inability to sit with companies and lead, guide, direct, and coach within the company hallways. All right, that was bothering us, and was somewhat of a pushback. We just couldn't get in. Some companies in the United States, their offices were closed for months. All right, and just very difficult to get a quorum of people to talk about pain and solutions and so forth. And the staggering and uneven negative impact of the pandemic on manufacturers due to what we call artificial demand and supply shocks. What do I mean by that? When we had a lockdown, no matter what country you're in, that's an artificial demand shock. What does demand do? Demand goes to zero. Supply goes to zero. The first time that we've seen, at least in my 45 years in this business, where both demand and supply shocks happened simultaneously across all industries. A first time ever, all right? And so it really started to bother us. And these were some of the impetus for us to take our 12 years worth of intellectual property and experience and essentially put it into a survey and then use some algorithms to help folks help themselves handling the demand and supply shocks. So I talked about the VUCA. Let's go real quick. What does VUCA stand for? Volatility. This describes something that is liable to vary or change, sometimes very quickly and often for the worst. What is that? That's government lockdowns, all right, across the entire globe. U is for uncertainty. This is the state of not knowing or being able to rely on something. What is this? This is demand and supply shocks. We're in like nth normal now, all right? C is for complexity. This can be defined as something with many parts in an integrated arrangement. What's this? This is our global supply chains. We all have global supply chains. You can work inside your garage and still have a complex global supply chain. Why? Because of the internet, all right? So that is our complexity that we're dealing with today. And then finally, A is for ambiguity. Something's ambiguous if it's open to more than one interpretation. So take all of these elements, add them up, and we have our VUCA world that we're wrestling with, all of us, in our profession. This, you might be familiar with this one, the bullwhip effect. We call it the bullwhip effect on steroids. This is what's happening, and it's been happening since April of 2020. What is the bullwhip effect? It's the uncertainty caused by distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain. Look at it this way. You can have demand uncertainty. When you have a customer over there on the left-hand side of that box, any deviation of order level amplitude by a customer in terms of order, volume, and amplitude can manifest itself pretty quickly into an ugly situation going back up the supply chain to suppliers. You can have the same effect on the supply side. On the left-hand side of that chart, you might have a foundry, someone who's making raw materials. If they have a supply chain risk incident or event, that can manifest itself down the supply chain to the customer, all right? And so we looked at both of this. We understand, because we're trained as supply chain pros on the bullwhip effect, we came up with, back in April of 2020, what we call the W-like recovery. And I show you as an example, because this is what it looks like out there. And we told all our clients, all our workshop attendees, this is what we're going to be living with for the next 2 years. Blue is retailer. Red is a wholesaler, green could be a distributor, and orange could be the manufacturer. Because why? Because we have latency in all of our supply chains from point to point. And the actual demand and supply shocks essentially have amplified that latency. That's what we're living with every day, all right? And so we put that together and called it the W-like recovery, all right? So, what did we come up with? We came up with something called the 90-Day Action Plan Development Program, all right? And it's all online, untouched by human hands, truthfully. It's a 90-day action plan via an online survey, 7 hours of time invested over 3 months. That's your time as a client. It's virtual onboarding, collaboration, and coaching sessions. Everything is online because we felt compelled to do it that way. All right, and what does it do? Well, you go through the survey, and it basically comes out with where you are. Now, there's a 5-stage maturity model. I have some examples. We'll give you some more context. But it basically says, here's where you are in the 5-stage maturity model based on your answers. It then also computer generates who you are, and I'll give you more context on that in terms of what is your company's risk appetite. It's very important that you understand that. And then it also produces a computer-generated graph that kind of looks like a kite. We call that, how do you operate? That's your operational propensity. And so we affectionately say, what's the shape of your corporate culture kite? And then finally, essentially, looking at those 3 computer-generated graphs, the algorithms tend to give a prospect or a client a 90-day action plan that we feel comfortable that they could potentially exercise and complete. and get a positive user experience, all because of the algorithms going back and forth. It looks like this. The process looks like this. We shoot for a designated lead and have an onboarding call with that person. We ask for a minimum of 5 to 8 stakeholders from the company. Only takes about 30 minutes to complete the survey, all right? It's not testing your supply chain skills. It's testing your risk perspective. That's what it does. Then we have a 90-day action plan. It's kind of McKinsey-like. It's maybe 35, 45 pages where we give a lot of insight, a lot of additional supply chain risk and resiliency insight. And then we have checkpoint calls with the client. Confirmation of the 90-day plan, that's the first call. We talk about it. We ask about how do you feel about it and so forth and so on. Then we have a 30-day call. Did anything work? What did you try? How's it going? Then in 60 days, we have a pulse check or a temperature check with the lead. And then after about 90 days, we hopefully have moved them through these processes and essentially talk about what's next. So it's kind of a process, all online, all virtual. All right, just wanted to share that with you. Why is risk appetite so important? Here's the McKinsey report. If you get your hands on it, it's really great. Here's what they did. Over on the right-hand side, they touched almost every single industry that across the arena. So they had deep pockets, they have research capabilities. This is why it's really great. And there are many, many more nuggets in this report. But they put together a shock exposure indicator over here on the right, on the y-axis on the right was an industry's exposure to shock from low to high. And then they color-coded it, and they also put more insight in terms of why. The color codes talk about, well, because this industry is globally innovative. Another one could be resource intense. Another one could be regionally processing, and then labor intense. So they did a nice job. You can kind of take a look at the risk exposure, but we thought this was great because they came out with a finding, and here it is. The COVID-19 pandemic has once again driven the necessity of managing operational and supply chain risks. It has catapulted these issues to the top of the CEO's agendas, and the unexpected now has to be considered probable. We couldn't say it any better, all right? So again, we tout this report. It really is great, got a lot of nuggets in it, so we wanted to share that with you. All right, risk appetite. This again comes from the McKinsey report. Risk profession has defined risk appetite as, and this is not us. This is not supply chain pros. This comes from chief risk officers who are certified, who run at a higher level. We call it ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. If you're aware, it's called GRC, Governance Risk Compliance, much higher level than supply chain management. That's who did the survey in the McKinsey report. And they're just articulating what this profession, which is huge around the globe, what they consider the definition of risk appetite. The aggregate level and types of risk a board of directors and management are willing to assume to achieve its strategic objectives and the business plan consistent with what? The capital you can muster, your cash liquidity, and other regulatory requirements. So this comes from the pure risk profession. Let's talk a little bit more about risk. Why is risk management hard? Basically because of this, something called risk perspectives. I'll share this with you and let you noodle on it for 30 seconds. Perspectives. Take a look. Now, why do we believe this? We've been in this space for 12 years. Essentially, there's only two drivers that produce a risk perspective for you. There's only two. One is your career experience with risk. That's one. The other is where you reside in your company. And I mean that in terms of hierarchical position and departmental or discipline. There's only two, all right? Those two are the drivers. When we say, here's a risk, then you're going to give us a perspective. Those are the two drivers. We've done many, many studies, and so has the risk profession. So risk is hard because everyone has their own risk perspective on the same risk, all right? And this guy said it best. Risk is all about culture, folks. All right? It is totally diametrically opposed and different than us and our supply chain performance improvement. All right? We can come in and say, I can reduce your inventory by 20% if we do this, this, and this, and they say, go do it. That's hard performance improvement. All right? Hard ROI. Risk is an entirely different arena. All right? It's guttural. It's perspective. It's opinion. It's a totally different discipline. All right? So we wanted to make sure you were aware of that. So let's take a look at some use cases. I'm watching the time. Use cases of this tool. Here's the maturity model, better picture, 5 stages: foundational, visibility, predictability, resiliency, and sustainability. We feel very comfortable with this. On the left-hand side, on the y-axis, is your maturity level from low to high. On the x-axis is 0 to infinity. And as you move across that, we think there's a competitive advantage. All right? So the foundational is, you're just getting engaged with supply chain risk. You're trying to get education and awareness. The visibility is second, and rightfully so, because most of us don't have good visibility in our supply chain up to our suppliers and down to our customers. And remember, without good supply chain visibility, what you don't know about your supply chain can and will hurt you. Third, predictability. Maybe not exactly what you're thinking. We're not talking about predicting the next earthquake or typhoon or cyclone. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about digitizing your supply chain. Why? So that you can run what-if scenarios, all right? And to see how your supply chain will react to different risk stimuli. That's what we're talking about. Next, resiliency, taking all the tools, techniques, and methods and embedding them in your daily supply chain decision-making. And then sustainability may not be exactly what you're thinking. It's not top level, bottom 3. It's not green. It's how do I sustain this journey if I do a proof of concept? How do I expand it to throughout my enterprise? That's what we mean by sustainability. Our mantra, identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks. So the question always is, where is your company on this maturity curve? We have an example. This is an example of heavy industry out of the United States. There's the model. The red icon over here is in smack dab in the middle of visibility. All right, so that's their as-is condition. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just this is their as-is condition based on their survey answers. And then up on the top, very bold, their to-be, we asked 2 questions, their future to-be told us that they want to get up to the top. They want to move along this supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model. So that was very bold. All right, their as is in visibility. I got a couple more. This is the classical 4 perspectives on risk. There's only 4. I'll give you a quick thumbnail sketch. I'm watching the time. On the left-hand side on the y-axis is your risk viewpoint. The lower you are on the y-axis, you look at risk as a negative. The higher you are on that axes, you look at risk as an opportunity. Again, no right or wrong answer, all right? On the x-axis are decision tactics that normally support these 4 perspectives. The perspectives are, the orange are pragmatists. Those are people who wait till the very, 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 very last moment to decide on a risk-type decision. The dark blue are conservatives who essentially do not like risk at all, and they try to mitigate and stay away from any risk that will produce a loss. Top blue managers, they do a lot of balancing with a lot of good algorithms and so forth. And then the maximizers are what we call gamers. These are folks who look at risk as an opportunity saying, wow, look at the big reward. You've all heard this, big reward, big risk. They look at that reward and go, let's go get it before our nearest competitor. So there's only 4, all right? Those are kind of the ovals that the computer model puts together, and then essentially we do this. What you can see is, you see the 4, you see the same picture. This just happens to be a consumer packaged goods company who went through the analysis and came up with, well, who are we? Well, we're kind of prag conservators, all right? And you might say, well, geez, can you have 2 styles? Can you have 2 attitudes or 2 appetites? Yes, you can. We've been in companies that are $7 billion US with $1 billion each division, diametrically opposed differences in terms of risk appetite because of the industry they're in. So you can have more than one, all right? And finally, the kite. This is a picture of the kite. I won't go through it. It's pretty detailed, but essentially we're looking at what is the shape of your kite, and normally the long pole in the tent is your propensity, the longest pole. In this case, it was bureaucratic in terms of this example, and I'll just show you one more real example. Sorry. This was a high-tech solution company. There's the classical approach. What we do is we put the longest pole on the bottom in a computer-generated graph, and that one was clannish. We call it trapped and clannish. But as you can see, this is a high-tech solution company, been in the business for 30 years. And the bigger spread in this Likert-type chart, the wider the spread says that you as a company are doing multiple threads, multiple approaches simultaneously, and the higher the number, that says you're doing pretty well at all of these. That's a mature organization there in terms of their operational propensity. So I wanted to give you some context on the actual approaches. I'll give you one more foundational stage, meaning what does it look like? How do you start? Well, you could do the online consortium courses. We have 2. There are other courses out there to get educated. You can actually embrace and buy the book to kind of begin your foundational approach to education. You might want to identify a small product line and identify the possible risks. Maybe you want to map that small product line, maybe 10 stock keeping units, and go from customer to supplier. We don't care what you use, but map it out. Get people to talk about the supply chain from customer to supplier. Then maybe you want to identify some key suppliers from that mapping exercise and calculate their Altman Z-score. And again, if you don't know what Altman Z-score, it's a predictor. It's out there, it's free. It's been around for 40 years. All you need is income and balance sheet data. Now, you might not be able to get it from a private company, but publicly you can. You can go out on Wikipedia, Instapedia. It's out there. Been there for 40 years. It has a 90% accuracy rate to predict bankruptcy, financial bankruptcy, 12 to 15 months out into the future. Who wouldn't want that? And it's free. That's what the Altman Z-score is. Maybe secure a sponsor for funding, get a supply chain risk lead. Maybe begin to assess those identified risks, use some assessment techniques that we have available to us. And maybe you might want to even subscribe to a risk alert system. There are several out there because, again, what you don't know can and will hurt you. All right? Benefits, and then we'll close. I think this is, there are some pretty good benefits. Cost reduction, cost avoidance. These are observations by us over 12 years. Working capital increase, cash conversion cycle improvement, and the Altman Z-score. Our mantra is this: if you're going to get in this space, think big, start small, and act fast, because time is money in the risk arena. All right? Why spend time on supply chain risk? This is our mantra. If you can identify, assess, and mitigate a risk in your supply chain faster than your nearest competitor, we think that's a strategic advantage for you. If you have good prevention, meaning proactive planning like scenario planning and so forth, that can lead to reduced insurance premiums. We've seen it, all right? It's great. Reactive, good reactive responsiveness to a risk event. That's a different skill. It's one thing to plan, and it's another skill to react responsively and quickly. That can lead to revenue, additional revenue and share, market share, because you're reacting faster to the same event that your nearest competitor may be wrestling with as well. So a good, robust set of programs, if leveraged, will give you cost reduction, cost avoidance, top-line revenue and market share growth to us. That's a pretty solid set of ROIs to survive and thrive in this arena. How do you know? I'm not going to get into this. I'll just go through this and finish up. We're running out of time. You've seen that. More to come. I'll say this. You can participate in the panel. It comes right after this session. We're going to talk about what will it take to gain traction around the world in terms of more traction for these concepts. And then we're going to do a deep dive on Wednesday at 9 a.m. I think it's in room 11, where we'll give you more case studies across multiple industries using this tool and our other assessment tool. So with that, I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.